Parashat Chukat is like the other sections which we have been reading till now, is basically narrative. It's telling a story, parts of the story of the travel of Bnei Yisrael from Egypt to Eretz Yisrael. It's true the first section, which gave the name Chukat, is pure halacha, and the laws of the Paraduma. But that is so surprising that Chazal, of course, questioned what it was doing here. And there's no particular connection to the story before or afterwards, unlike the previous Parashat where there were halachic sections, but they were either obviously connected, as in Parashat Korach, which has laws of Kohanim and Nevi'im after the great argument, the machloket, concerning the status of the Nevi'im and the Kohanim. And even in Parashat Shlach, which was followed by two halachic parashiyot, and there the Mefarshim explained that the first halacha that's there begins with the words Ki tavar eretz moshvotechem. It was in fact a random halacha, that the halacha itself is not connected, but God needed an opportunity to remind them that they would in fact be coming to Eretz Yisrael, and it was part of the comfort that God was applying to them after the terrible decree of the 40 years of wandering in the desert. But Parashat Chukat is about what to do with dead people. So there's a very interesting and I think quite correct explanation that they were learning Torah all the time, but Parashat Chukat skips from the first year to the last year. All of a sudden we find ourselves at the edge of Eretz Canaan. Miriam dies, then Aaron dies, and then they meet the Eretz Edom, they meet the people of Edom, and then they meet Sichon v'Og, whereas Shlach was obviously in the beginning of the second year of their sojourn in the desert, and Korach, which has no date, but most Mefarshim agree also was in the very, very beginning. The halachot of death and paraduma is basically the narrative of the in-between 38 years. Nothing actually happened except that they spent 38 years dying. So the connection, the skip, the jump from the second year to the 39th year is we describe what they were doing through a halacha. The halacha is that what death does to the Jews, why death is not a good thing, and why there's a ceremony called Paraduma. But basically, again, the Parasha is about the narrative, dominated by the great story of Mei Meriva, when Moshe Rabbeinu argues, fights, has this encounter with the Jewish people searching for water, and he committed some sort of a sin which was not clear from the Torah, involving the smiting of the rock at Mei Meriva, and a very, very important conclusion that neither he nor Aaron will enter Eretz Yisrael, and Aaron soon afterwards dies. The end of the Parasha has the beginning of is basically the beginning of the war of conquest, although this is not the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, but of the land of Sichon v'Og, described at length. Their encounter with Sichon and with Og, and the conquest of their territory by Moshe Rabbeinu. In the middle, there are three very short stories, incidents, which are really baffling in their significance. The first one, after Aaron has died in Hor HaHar, Perek Chaf Aleph, Pasuk Aleph, 3 psukim. וישמע כנעני מלך ערד יושב בנגב כי ויסר דרך אתרים וילחם בישראל ויש ממנו שבי. The Knaani, king of Arad, who was living in the Negev, in the south. We assume that the south is the south of Eretz Yisrael, and Arad isn't found a city in the south of Eretz Yisrael. But he comes, they're still in the desert. The Jews have not reached even close. They're just beginning to approach the land of Edom. He hears that they're coming, and he initiates a war. They don't come to conquer him, he comes to conquer them. Vayesh mimenu shevi, he took a hostage, or hostages. Vayido Yisrael nedel Adonai v'yomar netonti tenet am bezeh biyadi v'achamti et areihem. The Jews take a vow that if God gives them success in this war that's being forced upon them, that they will v'hacharamti et areihem. Hacharamti, the word cherem, Uncle says it means I will wipe them out. I will give it, I won't take it for myself, but it will be cherem. Cherem means dedicated to God. And sure enough, the third pasuk, Vayishma Adonai b'kol Yisrael v'yiten et ha'knani v'yachem etem v'yet arehem v'yikra shem ha'makom chorma. The place was even called chorma because they did the cherem. The cherem is, Tanakh Ugla says, v'gamar yatan. Literally translate the word, becomes that idiomatic expression in modern English. They finished them off. Gamar otam. There was nothing left of these people. This is the first war that the Jews, or battle, the Jews are conducting. The mention, the fact of Arad and the Negev would immediately, in our own minds, associate this with the eventual war of conquest, which will take place after they cross the Jordan in Yoshua ben Nun. It's all of 3 psukim. There's no description of how it's done, what took place. And the result is they don't actually conquer it. It doesn't become part of the settled land. On the contrary, it will not be settled because the word cheva means, I'm giving it to you, God, and that's your side. You will help us. You will give this people into our hands, and what will we do? What will I do? The Jews say, and God hears their voices, and these Canaanite are destroyed. What's the point of the story? It's neither Sichon v'Aug, which is the beginning of true conquest, although on the wrong side of the Jordan River, but the land is taken over, conquered, and eventually we know is settled by the 2.5 tribes. Nor is it the beginning of the conquest of Eretz Israel, even though it may be in Eretz Israel. The actual southern border of Eretz Israel is not 100% clear because it's in the middle of the desert, and therefore it's hard to know exactly, but it's probably very close to Eretz Israel, but doesn't seem to be we're beginning the conquest of Eretz Israel, which would be very surprising since we know you have to wait till Sefer Yoshua to do that. And that's the end of the story. 3 psukim. Compare that to Sichon v'Og. 20, 30 psukim. Describing which cities they conquered and how they were afraid and how they fought. What's the point of this story? It's followed by the next story. Pasuk Daled. Vayisu mehor ha'ar derech emsuf l'svor bet Eretz Edom v'tiktzar nefesh ha'am badarech. They're taking a detour because Melech Edom, the king of Edom, has not allowed them to traverse his land on the way to Eretz Israel, and God forbids them to battle with Edom. They are going around. Lisbov et Eretz Edom. They're going out of their way, and it adds to their journey. How much does it add? They had just spent 40 years going from Mitzrayim to Eretz Israel. Apparently they get a few more days now. Vatiktzar nefesh ha'am badarach, the soul of the people, the spirit of the people became short. It was worn out. And 39th year, and yet we seem to be throwback to the earlier history of the Jews. Vayidaber ha'am be'Elohim u'v'Moshe lama ha'elitunu mi'Mitzrayim namut b'midbar ki ein lechem ve'ein mayim v'nafshenu katza v'lechem ha'kilokal. They speak against God and against Moshe. Most rebellions, they come to complain to Moshe. Here it says explicitly, Vayidaber ha'am be'Elohim u'v'Moshe. They spoke against. The bet means against. They spoke against God and against Moshe, saying, why have you taken us out of Mitzrayim to die in the desert? There is no bread and there is no water, and our souls have run out of strength. Of the lechem hakilokal, apparently reference to the man. What happens? God immediately punishes them. Vayishalach Adonai ba'am et hanechashim haserafim vayinashachu et ha'am vayamot am rav miYisrael. They were punished. Snakes came and bit them and they died. People say, "Vayavo Am Moshe Vayomu Chatanu ki dibanu v'nayu b'achu utpalel l'nai v'yasam eleinu tanachash." They came to Moshe Rabbeinu to say, "We're sorry, we've sinned. You should pray for us." And God tells Moshe Rabbeinu to make nachash nechoshet. He should make a snake out of copper and put it on a staff, on a pole, and anyone who looks at it will be cured. And that's what happened. The story is enigmatic. Again, what's it coming to tell us? Why does it take place here? What's the point of the story? And secondly, it's enigmatic because of the rather strange and unusual solution. Solution is magical. They make a copper serpent. Anyone who looks at it is saved. Doesn't die, but vachai, he will live. End of the story. And the third story is not a story. We know something must have taken place, but it doesn't say what it is. The very next pasuk, pasuk Yud. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael vayachanu ba'ovot, vayisu me'avot vayachanu b'yevarim b'midbar asher pnei Moav. V'misham nasau vayachanu menachal zarel, misham nasau vayachanu me'ever ha'arnon. The story part that's explicit is they had 4 stops. Should point out the form of the pasuk, vayisu, and they traveled from here and they encamped someplace else, is what we call Parashat Mas'ei, a listing of all the trips and encampments of the Jews from Egypt, from Yam Suf, till they come to the border of Eretz Israel. We haven't been doing this till now. They've done a lot of traveling. We don't have a list of the places, unless it's connected to some story. And here it's not connected, just what it says. They moved from Avot to Iyei Avarim, to Nachal Zared, and then to Ever Arnon, another river, the Arnon. What takes place? Pasuk which is meant to be not understood. Al Kain Ye Amar B'Sefer Milchamot Adonai, in the book of the wars of the Lord. We don't know what that's talking about. It is said, Ve'et vahei b'sufa ve'et ha'nachalim arnon ve'esh ha'nachim asher natal Hashem v'tar v'nishan legvul Moav. 2 psukim which mention some places and some words, we're not sure what they are. Vahei b'sufa mentions nachalim arnon. They had been in a nachal, they had been by a stream. Arnon was a place they were there. But that's what it says there. And then they continue traveling. Again, we're simply dealing in the events are simply travels. Misham be'era. They come to a well, and another unusual reaction. They sang a song. Shortly after what was a sin and a punishment by God of the Parashat Nachash and Nachoshet, the copper serpent, now you have something took place which involves a song. Songs mean a great triumph. The previous song was Shirat Hayam, when they had been at the edge of the sea, split sea, and they saw all Mitzrayim destroyed. The same words, Az Yasher Yisrael et Hashira Azot. Why? What took place? We don't know. All they were doing was traveling. They were going from place to place. What elicited the song? There are Midrashim, and I'm not going to supplant or replace or even mention what the Midrashim was. Something took place. The Jews sang a song of victory, a great triumph. Even the song is not understood. It begins with a pasuk about a well, and then it appears to again start listing places. The last thing is definitely a place where they're close to the entering of Eretz Israel. Stay Moab, the field of Moab, Rosh HaPiska, on top of the mountain, Nishkafa al Penei HaYeshimon, above the wilderness below, and then you get to the story of Edom, afterwards Moab, afterwards Sichon ve'Og. What is all this about? I think the answer is, without explaining all the mystifying details, is that after all, we are dealing with the second generation. All the people here, more or less, are new. They were not the people who we've read about in the first half of Sefer Bamidbar and in Sefer Shemot, who all have died, because 40 years have indeed gone by. And in fact, Miriam has already died, and Aaron has died. Basically, as far as we know, we're left with Moshe Rabbeinu, who's going to die, as we know, and Kalev and Yoshua, who will survive and lead on. And to our surprise, they're also complaining. They don't seem to be much different than the first generation. The first generation is punished and not allowed to enter, and they will enter without even a word or a murmur that God is reconsidering his plan to let these people enter Eretz Israel. These are the people who will conquer Eretz Israel with or without Moshe, with or without Aaron, with or without Miriam. What is the difference between the first generation and the second generation? Is it that the first generation were evil, were sinners? Take back the word evil. Were they sinners? The second generation were righteous? Well, no. We have a complaint that does sound very similar to the complaints before. They say, why are we in the desert the whole trip is a mistake. That's what they're saying. Lama ha'elitunu mimitzrayim lamut b'midbar. B'nafshenu katza. And in fact, the Torah uses a phrase which is more serious than used in the previous rebellions. Vaydaber ha'am be'elohim. They spoke against God. It sounds very condemning. That's not really the difference. Mepharshim will, and I agree, look for small differences, something which will be indicative of a different way of sinning, perhaps, and perhaps what I'm going to say will make that clear as well, but I don't think that's the main difference. I think the difference is the response. All three of these stories, going back to the first one, the war and Avad, no sin, they were attacked and they won. The Batiktsar Nefesh Am Badarech, the reaction against the fact that they were tired, no water, no bread, and even though 40 years have gone by, apparently 5 extra days, unexpected days, that's what Rashi says. You can survive 40 days in the desert, but if then I add 2 more days after you weren't expecting it, it could really break your spirit. And the story of the Nachash and Nachoshet, and the final story, which I don't know what the story is about, but something took place there which elicited the response of Hashira. In all 3 stories, you have something which never took place in the first generation. The Jews have a problem, they meet a war, or they have a sin because they're worn out, or the 4 last stages have in some way caused them to have an experience which requires a response, and there's a response. In all the previous crises of the first 2 years in the desert, what happened was that the Jews sinned. God didn't punish them. He came to Moshe Rabbeinu. God came to Moshe Rabbeinu and said to Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm going to punish them. You should separate yourself. Be careful, because I'm going to kill them all. And then Moshe Rabbeinu then prays, and God forgives them, or partially forgives them, or in the case of the Meraglim says, I forgive them, but only in 40 years. The people are not really part of the story. It's all conducted on the basis of a dialogue between Moshe and God. I think we all understand that if God is decided to destroy the Jews, but first he tells Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm going to destroy the Jews, it's an open invitation for Moshe to then pray as Moshe, in fact, does in every single one of those cases. So even the statement, I'm going to destroy all the Jews, that God does and says, is basically an invitation for a dialogue, prayer, salvation, for Moshe Rabbeinu to exercise his great ability and great conviction and great obligation to be the person who intercedes for the Jews before God. What do the Jews do? Some of them die, and the others don't die. They're not part of the story. They're part of the surrounding story, but they're not part of the drama. In all of these 3 stories, Moshe Rabbeinu is almost not involved. The first story, which doesn't involve any sin, but it involves a challenge. They're meeting their first war. 39 years earlier, there'd been a war, so to speak, with Amalek, who had attacked, and the response was totally miraculous. Yeshua prepares the army, but Moshe Rabbeinu stands on the mountain, raises his arms, and the Jews are successful. That was 39 years earlier. Here they meet the first Kanaani, and it's Kanaani Melech Avad, which actually makes no sense if you view the Hebrew. It should have been Melech Avad HaKnaani. Vayishma HaKnaani means the Canaanite people. It's possible to call an individual HaKnaani if he's the king of Canaan, so it's not against the rules, but it should have said Melech Arad HaKnaani. It says Vayishma HaKnaani Melech Avad. The war is with Melech Avad, but I think the pasuk is saying to us, you're coming to Canaan. You're beginning the next great stage, and a difficult one. Basically, for the 38 years of these young Jews, life had been good. They were taken care of by God, no great sins, no great crises. It was a bit boring in the desert, but they were learning Torah the whole time. They weren't facing existential crisis. Here they're coming to the war that they've been expecting for 38 years. What's their response? And in fact, they lose. Vayish bimenu shevi. Could have been a great crisis. They met the enemy and he was not yours. In fact, you are his. Some of you. Vayish mimenu shevi. Hostages, captives were taken. What's the response? The Jews respond. It doesn't say that Moshe Rabbeinu goes and prays. Vayidar Yisrael neder l'Adonai vayomar. The response of the Jews, Vayidar Yisrael. Yisrael is in contraposition to Vayishma HaKna'ani. The Canaanites heard and came to do a war. Yisrael, the Israelites, no individuals here, Vayidar Yisrael neder Hashem vayomar. They have a vow. The vow says, you give us these people, and we will give them to you. We will give their possessions unto you. It's a form of prayer. It's not the usual form of prayer. It's not beseeching. But the people went to God to solve, as part of the solution to the problem. And they took a neder, they took a vow. If you deliver these people to us in the battle that's going to take place, vayishma Adonai, and God heard, God listened, B'kol Yisrael. He listened to the Jews. That's never taken place. God has listened to Moshe Rabbeinu after a great deal of persuasion and argumentation. And here, God listens to the Jews after no persuasion, no argumentation. They offer a deal, He accepts the deal. End of the story. Very short story. It's not about the battle. The story is not about the battle, which would have deserved, I think, 10 psukim describing who went left, who went right, and who was killed. The story is about Vayidar Yisrael neder Hashem vayishma Hashem b'kol Yisrael. The first pasuk tells you the background. There's a war. Second pasuk tells what the Jews do, and the third pasuk tells what God does in response. The next story, they're on a long trip. Here it's different. The crisis is not one of war, but one of their own spirit. And it turns out that if you thought that these were now supermen, it's not true. You told them to go 3 more days around Eretz Edom. They're taking a detour. It has a similar reaction in them to the first time the Jews had a problem 39 years earlier. Their spirits were shortened. They ran out of spirit. God doesn't tell Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm going to kill them. He kills them. Moshe Rabbeinu has been short-circuited here. The response of God is, Vayeshalach Hashem ba'am et hanachashim ha-serafim vayenashachu et ha'am vayamot amrav v'Yisrael. God sends the serpents to bite them. What's the response of the Jews to that? Okay, they do go to Moshe Rabbeinu, but what does it say? Vayavo ha'am en Moshe vayomu chatanu. That's a phrase that hasn't appeared before. That the Jews immediately say when there's a magefa, there's a pestilence, there's a punishment, there's the sword. The Jews figure it out on their own. They realize, and it's very short. The spirit was shortened. They ran out of steam, and now they have steam. They stand on their feet. They take responsibility. Chatanu ki dibarnu v'Adonai uvach, because we've spoken against God and Moshe Rabbeinu. Hitpalel el Hashem v'yasam alev t'nachash v'hitpalel Moshe ba'adam. Okay, they ask Moshe Rabbeinu to pray. It's true, they don't pray. They ask Moshe Rabbeinu to pray, but they've spoken. It's a form of prayer. Saying chatanu vidui is a form of prayer. And when Moshe Rabbeinu prays, he doesn't persuade God to stop the Magifa. Moshe Rabbeinu prays, vayitpalel Moshe ba'ad ha'am, vayomer Hashem el Moshe, God says to Moshe, make the saraf, make the snake, make the copper snake. Okay, he tells Moshe Rabbeinu what to do. What's the point of the copper snake? So it says, vayayim nachash nachoshet ish v'ibita nachash nachoshet v'chai. Chazal famously referred to this case, a Mishnah in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and asked the obvious question, really, is it magic? How does a copper snake cure the Jews of the snake bites of the nechashim, of the serafim that God had sent? The nechashim ha-serafim. How does that cure them? It's not a technical question. It's against the Torah. We don't solve the problems by magical objects. B'chi nachash meimit or nachash mechayeh. Chazal asks, can a snake kill or can a snake cure? And the answer is, Ella bizman she'Yisrael mistaklim klapei mala u'mishtabim et libam babim shemayim hayu mitrapim. It was just a marker. The Jews would look up, and the Jew would look up. The snake was placed on a high stake. The Jew would look up at the snake and pass the snake. If he looked at the snake for salvation, he would not be saved. But they looked past the snake. They would look up to the sky. Umisha'abdim et libam. They cast, they enslaved, literally. They committed their souls, they committed their hearts to their Father earth in heaven, and that's what saved them. It wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu who saved them. Moshe Rabbeinu asked God what to do. God told him what to do. What saved them? Mishabdim et libam lavim sheshmayim. The copper snake was merely a means to arouse, successful means, to arouse a people who had been described as being kotzer nefesh, shortened of hearts. Nafshenu katza, our souls despise the food we're eating, the man that they're eating, which was a terrible thing to say. And Moshe Rabbeinu did a little bit of a trick, and these people found that they had the spirit to say, one, chatanu, and two, to misha'abdim et libam, to commit their souls to God. And the third story, I can't describe what took place. I have no idea what took place, despite having read Rashi. They're traveling from place to place, and they come to a place where there's apparently no water. Misham be'era, hua be'er asher amar Hashem leMoshe asaf otam ve'etna lahem mayim. An unknown episode which is being referred to. They had run out of water again, and there was a be'er. There was a well there. And then they sang a song about the well. Ali be'er enula. I think here too, although obviously there's more to the story than meets the eye, which is why the Medrashim are important, but what were the Jews drinking till now? Miriam had died at the beginning of the Parasha. Chazal say that Miriam has a be'er, a traveling be'er, which is of course a contradiction. Wells cannot travel. Wells they dig into the earth for a reason. But Miriam had a traveling well. When she died, the well dried up. Moshe Rabbeinu has provided water since then from a rock that flows of water. It's true, Moshe Rabbeinu had a complicated relationship with this rock. He smote it twice and God punished him and Aaron. But the water nonetheless flowed. So the Jews are drinking the water which is flowing out of a rock. That's not a be'er, it's a kind of a ma'ayan, it's a kind of a spring. We don't know where the water comes from. It comes from within the rock rather than from the depths of the earth, but it's a flowing spring. And now they're getting water. At some point, they came to this place called Be'era, and they're getting water from a well. What do they say? Az yasher Yisrael tashira hazot ali ve'er anula. Be'er chafaru hasarim karu nedivei ha'am. They quite correctly point out the difference between a well and a spring. Spring is natural. The water flows from within the earth. A well has to be dug. And this particular well, I don't know who dug it, but I know what the reaction is. Be'er chafaru hasarim karu nedivei am. Rashi says the sarim are Moshe ve'Aaron, nedivei am, the people. And that's what we're singing a song about. I think what they're saying in a poetic manner, the Ve'er, they're talking about themselves. They're talking about the well that they got the water from, but they're talking about themselves. We are, the Jewish people, are the well that has been dug by Moshe, Aaron, and our fathers. For 40 years, 39 years, we have been educated, we have been taught, we have been molded by sarim, by princes, karu nidivei am, the chosen of the people. Reishei Amma, Ukuda says, the leaders of the people have dug out this well, and now water flows. In other words, we are flowing with water. Our fathers were empty shells. They were, the explanation, they were slaves. Slaves are not able to take initiative. Slaves are not able to pray. Slaves simply know they have to go. If they have a problem that he doesn't know about, they should tell the master and he'll fix it for them. Someone else will fix your problems. Someone will feed you. Someone will save you when you're in trouble. Someone might also punish you when you've been bad, but you don't do anything. You have no initiative of your own. The first generation at best could turn to Moshe Rabbeinu, and frankly they didn't even wait for that. Moshe Rabbeinu took care of their problems. The dependence on Moshe Rabbeinu was also probably the cause of the sin of Egel HaZahav. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't come down. They were hopeless, lost. Ish Moshe, we don't know what happened to him, and therefore we need something else. What do we need? We need another God. We need the Egel HaZahav. This second generation, they're still human, and they might sin, they might not sin, and they'll do mitzvot, and they won't do mitzvot. But they know that it depends on them. They take the responsibility. Moshe Rabbeinu has at best here someone who, when you needed a jolt, an educational jolt, God told him, put up the Nachash and Nachoshet. But what's taking place here is God responds to the Jews. In the first case, there was a war. Didn't go so well the first day. They prayed. Not a regular form of prayer. They took a neder. Neder is actually a form of prayer that involves my responsibility even more than prayer. Prayer, I beseech. Here they said, if you do, we will do. They promised, they committed themselves to God. They committed themselves to V'hacharamti et areihem. I will destroy the cities for you. I will make the cities cherem, kodesh Hashem. The second story, after being punished with the svafim, they say chatanu, vidui. Confession is a form of prayer. But what does it involve? It involves, doesn't say it, but it involves, we have sinned and we won't sin again. It's a commitment not to repeat the sin. They're sorry. They regret their sin. That's already a commitment. And Chazal therefore explained that Nachash and Nachoshet was also commitment, ultimate commitment. Mishabdim et libam labihem shabashamayim. And that commitment, vachai, that's what brought them life. And the third story, 5 psukim, 6 psukim, it doesn't even matter anymore. It's not a narrative in normal sense. Nothing happened. Something happened, but it's not important. The Torah doesn't tell us the details of what happened. The Midrash will explain that there was a miracle that took place which elicited the song. But what the story is about the response, not about the story. It's not about the war. It's not about the sin. It's not about the travels, the 4 places they had been in. Something there elicited a response, and the response was, they said, we are traveling. I could, if I wanted to, start to lidrosh the words, but I'm not going to do it because I'm not a darshan. It says that we are the be'er that was created by the greater people, by our leaders, by our teachers from the previous generation. Sarim, Moshe, Aaron, the divei ha'am. But we are successful. We have water flowing out of us. And the water that flows out of us is what they're singing a song about. It's a song of triumph. You need a nes to sing a song. That's the nes. People whose fathers had been basically empty shells. They were able, you could drag them to the left. You could drag them to the right. There is a difference in the sin. I said there's no difference in the sin. There is a difference. The earlier sins, they said, let's go back to Mitzrayim. It's bad in the desert. We want to go back to Mitzrayim. Going back to Mitzrayim is a slave response. We want to be enslaved because someone there will take care of us. That's a lack of human free spirit. They didn't say here they want to go back to Mitzrayim. They simply said, there's a problem here. They spoke against, terrible thing, they spoke against God and Moshe. Why did you take us out of Egypt? To die here. They thought they were dying. And they felt they were dying. And therefore they complained. But they didn't say, let's go back to Egypt. God forbid they want to go back to Egypt. They were free, proud individuals who were willing to fight for God, but they thought God had rejected them, and they were very depressed by it. And the solution was to commit to God anyhow, and everything would be okay. There is a difference in the sin as well. And the fact that they sang a song similar to Shirat Hayam, to the song of redemption at Yam Suf, is because they had seen the emergence of the Spirit, but it was within them now. It wasn't God doing a miracle for them on the sea, but they'd seen how from within themselves, by committing themselves to God, they were now felt victorious. They knew they were victorious. They were proceeding, going from place to place. The path was too long. And that's where they lost the Spirit. What does the pasuk say? What took place? They went from one place to another place. Four stops, one after the other, and a 5th stop at the Be'er. All of a sudden, they're moving from place to place to place to place. Confidently, they're going forward. That itself was the cause of the Shirah, the difference between the 2 generations. And this is I think, the important message for all of us. That to feel that the Jewish destiny is that God should drag us from place to place and save us. Moshe Rabbeinu should pray for us. God should save us. We should roll down the hill and achieve success, is the sin of the first generation, is the psychological sin, is the condition of the first generation which was unable to march to Eretz Israel. And the success of the second generation is whether they are always on the right path or they could fall from the path. It's very possible, but they know that it's their responsibility. And the main sign of that is their prayer. They pray by committing it through a vow. They pray by committing towards repentance. And they pray by singing a song that says, we have received the gifts of God. We have received the Torah for 40 years. We've been dug out, dug into the earth to find the water that's within. And we have found the water that's within. The water was there, it needed to be dug. The Spirit is within us, and they accept the responsibility that Spirit requires from them. And therefore, the very next step will be, Vayishlach Yisrael Malachim El Sichon Melech Emori Lemor. We're continuing on the journey, but now it's a journey where you see already people. It's Edom, doesn't work out so well. Edom doesn't let them go through, but nonetheless, they are about now. Now is when the story of the conquest of the land begins in its first stage, which is Moshe outside of Eretz Yisrael. But from now on, the narrative of Bamidbar till the end, at the very end of the Devarim, and then of course Yehoshua, is how do a conquering people in the Spirit of God, obeying God and praying to God, how does a conquering people conquer Eretz Yisrael? It's a story about the victory of the Spirit, which took a very long time and a very difficult thing to inculcate into them, basically different people, the children of the previous generation, but nonetheless the children of the previous generation, they who had been forged by the experience of those 40 years to be independent, responsible, taking responsibility for their own fate and their own sins. Confessing a sin is taking responsibility for the sin, and those are the people who will now move on to conquer, with God's help, all of Eretz Yisrael and begin Jewish history.